Hey, this is David Christian from the Modern Martial Artist. We have a lot of cool stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about Bisping versus Gastelum. I'm going to get a little bit into Gastelum's style and kind of what makes it unique, why he's doing so well in the UFC, and what kind of potential he has. Going to talk about the possibility of Dillashaw versus Johnson, which would be hands down one of the coolest fights of all time, I think. From two of my very favorite fighters, and I'm going to ramble about that for a little bit. Going into their footwork and how it's kind of different. I've never talked about Mighty Mouse's footwork before, so there you go. And lastly, I'm going to talk about a movie again, a martial arts movie, Bruce Lee's not Enter the Dragon, but Way of the Dragon, where he fights Chuck Norris. I've left timestamps for all of these in the description, so if you only want to hear about one thing, you can go right to that. But quickly before we get started, because of the whole Cyber Monday holidays thing, just for fun and because I can, I'm going to give you guys my ebook for half off. So instead of $15, it's going to be $7.50. I left a link to that below. If you want to follow it, comes with half an hour of exclusive breakdowns, so you can check that out if you want to too. Also, sorry if my voice is a little rough. It was my friend's 21st birthday last night, so we had to take her out and get her close to the point where she's going to be feeling, very sick and regretful the next day. As a result, I feel very sick and regretful the next day too. One of my friends had a harp, and I play guitar, so I sang some Metallica with electric guitar and harp music. So my voice is gone and the podcast is a bit late. So I apologize for that, but the result is I waited, and it's a good podcast with good energy. And I feel a lot of good points in it, but let me know if you don't think they are. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so Bisping versus Gastelum looks like a terrible decision made by Bisping, but I think what he really wanted to do is he's ending his career. He's going to fight for the last time in London, I think, somewhere in the UK, I think London. And that's going to be his big one. That's where he's going to go out, and that's going to be his tribute. That's what he's going to train hard for. I think he's just looking to take a couple more fights and cash in before he retires. So if you look at it from a financial standpoint, he made the right decision. If you look at it from legacy standpoint, of course not. And I'm not saying he is happy with losing. I'm not saying that he was planning on losing. I just think that the main motivation for taking the fight was to get in one more fight and take advantage of his UFC contract before he's out the door. That being said, why did it go so bad for him? Because he just took major damage. A lot of people are saying he shouldn't have been allowed to fight. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't really need to go into that too much, that it was a bad idea to let him fight. He looked slow. He looked really, really slow. When I talked about GSP versus him, I was going to say that I said that GSP would have some trouble catching leg kicks because Bisping throws them fast and they're snappy, and it'll be hard for him to catch them and then take them down off of that. But I think Gastelum actually caught one of them. They weren't fast. He didn't even bother to retract it like he normally does. If that Bisping had fought GSP, like if Bisping was in the shape he was in versus Gastelum and came in and fought GSP like that, first round knockout. That's how terrible a performance he put on. And I don't know how much of that was a psychological thing. I don't know how much of that was his body not being recovered. It was probably a mix of the two. To be totally honest though, I think it was more psychological, because if you look at his punches, they looked like the punches you see a guy who's not used to sparring throwing. You know the kind I'm talking about, where he gets in there the first time and he's really nervous, and he might make contact, but then he leaves the fist out there too long, and then he has this like wide-eyed expression and doesn't know what to do afterwards, like oh shit, I actually hit him. That he had that kind of expression, or like you're scared of getting hit back, that kind of look. He'd like tap, and then he'd catch Gastelum with like a punch that wasn't very well structured. It was slow, but he'd get him, and then he'd leave it out there too long and just like look really wide-eyed to see if something else was coming. maybe he was having a flashback to that left hook every time the GSP threw and hit him with. But but he looked like a novice. For anyone who knows fighting and has trained people and trained for a number of years themselves, you could tell his movement was wrong, and it was on a psychological level of just timidity. I'm not talking nuanced. I'm not talking like quick jab in out testing the waters. I'm talking the strikes themselves lacked purpose. I guess he wasn't. I'm sure he wanted to be throwing to hurt, but he wasn't throwing to hurt. But he wasn't throwing to establish distance. There was no purpose behind his strikes than just to strike. He looked like a deer in the headlights, to be totally honest, which is really weird to see from him. GSP must have affected him a lot more than he thought. I know he's been going around saying, the only reason it took me so long is because everyone else was on steroids, yada, 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 yada. But so if that's what he's built for himself, if that's the idea that he's built for himself in his head, and then for someone from that era to come back and just get rid of him that easily, to come back after 4 years, it left an impact beyond the actual damage he took. That being said, maybe I'm just trying to personalize it too much, and maybe it was just he hasn't recovered yet, because I'm sure he hasn't. He took some really hard shots, and the brain takes a while to recover. Everything takes a while to recover. But as far as financially, he made the right decision. He got an extra paycheck before he retires, and he's getting a lot of recognition. I'm sure a lot of people will watch his last fight, and that's totally on him. He's a grown man. If that's the way he wants to run his career, that's his decision. Should people have told him no and stepped in and stopped him? Probably. Yeah, I definitely think so. I echo that sentiment. But it is what it is. I don't think he got damaged too bad. Could have gone a lot worse. If he managed to take consistent damage for rounds and rounds and rounds and just hang in there by a thread for a long time, it could have been a lot worse for him. But still not good news. I want to talk about Gastelum a little bit in his style, because he's getting a lot more prestige. He just took out Bisping. He's fought a couple of prominent people. He was on a streak, and then it was kind of fizzled out. But he's an interesting fighter because he should be in a lower weight class. If you look at him, he looks like a chicken, right? He's the chicken leg fighter variety, where he's got the really skinny legs and a huge upper body. But beyond that, he's fat. And I'm not saying that to disrespect him. There's nothing wrong with picking the right weight class for you. You could put on a lot of fat, and if you could still move around quickly, then that gains you an advantage, because you're in a weight class where everyone moves slower than you. So if you can put on the extra weight and still maintain that speed you would have had at the lower weight class, then you got an advantage. And if you're durable and you're tough, you could take some damage at that higher weight class, and it might actually be a good idea. But he's an interesting fighter in part because of that. He's got a really good 1-2. Very solid. He's got that kind of 1-2 where he steps over, just kind of hinges his weight on his front leg, and puts his full body weight into his cross, and then just kind of steps through with it. He's got one of those crosses where you'd fall over if you didn't step through it. That's how much he kind of leans down and tilts into it. But beyond that, he's not a wild, crazy fighter. So what impressed me about him, especially because he's shaped like a top, like a spinning top, what impresses me is his balance. He's got good balance. Even if he was like ripped, shredded, six-pack abs, I'd still be impressed with that dude's balance. To have that kind of balance and be so top heavy, really impressive to me. He moves in the same way, and I know you guys are going to be like, what does he mean by that? But he moves in the same way that Mayweather moves. Mayweather moves in a specific way when he's moving forward, to where he always maintains balance, and he always keeps the possibility to rapidly retreat, but also keeps the possibility to lunge forward quickly. I go into that, it's kind of a complicated technique, even though it looks really simple. I go into it in my book. If you want to check that out, and I don't want to start going into stuff from my book anyways, because then the people who purchased it would be like, well, how come everyone else is getting it for free? But it is a very advanced, very simple to understand, but very hard to pull off technique that he does. to just, and if you watch his distance, part of it is he uses this kind of karate shuffle, or kind of like some boxers use it too. Boxers use it more just kind of bouncing back their lead foot in and out. Karate guys use it off of both feet more often, just kind of back and forth. He uses that too, but at closer range, he looks a lot like Mayweather, and he's always able to retreat just out of distance, make the guy miss, and then come in rapidly while they're off balance. And it's impressive to see. And you think he'd get tired, but because he's got such great economy of motion, because he's able to move around so easily. If you watch Gastelum, he always looks just so relaxed, even when someone's throwing bombs at him, because he's always in a position to get out of the way, and he knows he's in a position to get out of the way. He's not freaking out. He's not clenching his muscles. He's making other people miss, and he's staying in a position where he's comfortable. And I'll get a little bit into Mayweather too. Something that ticks me off about Mayweather is people think that it's just his cardio. He runs well, and don't get me wrong. There are Mayweather fights where I can't watch the whole fight because it's so freaking boring. That's a complaint I have about it too. I do wish he engaged more, along with what he does. I think that would have made him one of the most acclaimed, astonishing fighters of all time that people would be talking about for years and years and years, 50, 100 years from now. I think that people will know his name 50, 100 years from now, but it won't be revered or as reverential as other greats when they're spoken about, but because of his style. But regardless, what ticks me off about when people say that Mayweather just wears people out because of his advanced cardio, and yeah, you could, if you're fighting someone like Conor McGregor, then that can be a valid point. But even in that fight, what Floyd does is not just outpace you. He's not moving that fast. If you watch a Floyd Mayweather fight and you think he's wearing out his opponents by moving half as slow as they are, then I don't know what to tell you. That doesn't make any goddamn sense. These are trained professional boxers who can go more rounds than that, and have gone, in sparring probably more rounds than that in preparation, who've done a lot more heavy bag work than that, who can run just insanely far distances very quickly. These guys are in good, if not better shape than Mayweather, because Mayweather had a lot of these fights far past his prime. What Mayweather does is he has ease of movement. He keeps himself balanced, perfectly balanced at all time, and he unbalances his opponent. So what happens when you're unbalanced? You don't have rhythm. You can't move around easily. You need to clench your muscles. You need to work. Floyd Mayweather makes you work 10 times harder than him and still fail. So to a good extent, that's what Gastelum is doing with his boxing, and his body movement and his footwork. And it's I wonder how long it's going to take people to figure it out. I think the best thing to do is rush him. I think the best thing to do is just come at him really hard and get him off balance. Because if you let him stay at that range, he's just going to mess with you. And you're going to wonder why you keep narrowly missing him, just like you do with Mayweather. So we'll see where that goes with him. There are definitely some weaknesses to his style. He has as much as I'm praising his ease of movement, I feel he has a lack of athleticism. I feel like if he comes across someone who has as good balance as he does in that weight class, who can move quick for that weight class, it'd be a lot of trouble for him. And obviously he's not as good as wrestling as he is at boxing. But we'll see. He could have a very bright path ahead of him. He could end up champion, but that's a big if right now. Regardless, he's a fun fighter to watch, and it's fun to see Mayweather's thing kind of brought into MMA a little bit. All right, let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about that? GSP would kill him. hands down, GSP would destroy him. Because GSP has just as good balance, has a much better jab, has the wrestling, and I don't think that'd go well for Gastelum unless he massively improves over his next two fights, or GSP massively slows down over his next two fights. As always, I could be wrong, but that's just I don't think many people are going to argue about that. So moving on, what are we looking at here? So this is very preliminary. Very, very preliminary. But it looks like we might get a TJ Dillashaw versus Mighty Mouse fight, which would be hands down the coolest, most awesome matchup that I hope that I've ever experienced, that I'll ever get the chance to experience. You can tell by the way that my grammar's gone to shit just talking about it, that I'm really massively excited for this fight. These are two of my favorite fighters. These are two of the most talented people in MMA ever. And I get really excited about striking, and I get really excited about footwork. I get very, very excited about footwork. And with Mighty Mouse, there's someone who was able to keep up with Cruz, who was able to follow him. He didn't cut him off like Cody did, He followed him for a long time and was able to connect with someone much, much taller, land some amazing shots, and his footwork is so good that he forced Cruz to use grappling. Forced him to. I don't think there's any way that Cruz could have won, that Dominic Cruz could have won if he just stayed standing up. I think Mighty Mouse would have taken him down. I think Mighty Mouse should have done a lot more leg kicks. It cracked me up every time he tried to kick him in the head. I'm like, at least don't try to go over his damn shoulder. Like, come on, man. At least just, tighten up your kick, make it kind of like a cutting kick, rise up with it, and get him in the chin. Do more Holly Holmes kind of kick. Rather than a Wonder Boy kick, try to go over his shoulder and come down on him. But regardless, he was able to catch him. Should have thrown a lot more leg kicks, but he was able to keep up with him. And of course, so was TJ. A lot of people thought that TJ won against Cruz, and it was kind of controversial. And I see an argument for either side on that one. That was a very, very close fight. So they both have amazing footwork. So how's it different? Is a question you may or may not have been asking, but I'm going to answer anyways. So TJ Dillashaw's footwork, and you should probably know this if you've been watching my videos up until now, uses a lot of switch steps. So he'll or switch shifts, I guess you could call it. He'll shift into another stance, and that kind of footwork is more like hoppy, leaves you a little bit more unbalanced, but you're able to change angles quicker. And it's far more confusing than just keeping your feet kind of flat to the ground. And his whole thing is to come in directly, a little bit off an angle, but he mainly uses footwork to switch angles, and then comes in straight and tight directly at you. Then he'll switch angles, come in straight, switch angles, come in straight using footwork. Excellent defense, pretty good head movement. But his guard is where it's at, and his jab. In contrast, Mighty Mouse, and I'll do a breakdown on him. Don't worry, I'll do a breakdown on Mighty Mouse. But Mighty Mouse is much more like Willie Pep, and that he's got that sliding footwork, and he uses it to change stances. If you know what an L step is, your feet basically make the step of an L. Like, imagine you're in your stance, and then you want to move forwards or backwards, but you want to move to the side. You want to move laterally at the same time. So you slide your front foot back, and then you step out to the left or the right with your back foot. So it goes front foot to back, and then back foot slides out in the shape of an L. What Pep did is something I like to call a V step. I don't know if there's another name for it, but I've never been able to find one. So what that is you slide let's say you're in an orthodox stance with your left foot forward. You slide your front foot to your back, but then you step and change stances with your right foot. So it makes the shape of a V. So it's another kind of shuffle. It's another kind of sliding step. And you could actually do it like if you imagine an X where you're standing, you could go in any of those directions. As soon as you put your feet together, you could slide your left foot to your right with your left foot in front, and then you could slide it back into southpaw, or you could go slide it back and do the V step I just said, or just imagine it along an X, any kind of angles. This will make a lot more sense when I do the breakdown on it, but I think you get the point. And he keeps his feet, even if he's shifting forward, he does the kind of shift where he slides his foot along. To where, like, let's say he's throwing his cross, he'll slide his foot along while throwing his cross, or even if he's not throwing it, and keep low to the ground and tilt his head off angle to kind of catch up with you. And what's so great about that for him is it keeps him really solid to the ground and allows him to shoot. It allows him to go down on his knees, and it allows him to switch to grappling and takedowns very quickly. So they both got absolutely incredible footwork. It is somewhat similar with how quickly they change angles and how they move forward and how aggressive they are. It's going to be like freaking two explosive forces, like a hurricane and a volcano just like coming at each other, and a massive like storm of sparks and wind and explosions, and it's gonna be insanely epic to see these guys go at it if they can. When they get heated, if they both test each other, if they both take a couple of shots, and the fear goes away, and they're just looking to go at it full force, and these guys both do, it's gonna be electrifying. It's gonna be one of the greatest fights in history if that's the way it goes. If you see them both shifting angles, just flowing from clinches to strikes and then back to shifting footwork, and blitzes and these insanely like overpowered high kicks is gonna be really epic. I'll probably talk about it more when it happens. I'll do like a full breakdown on it, but I will say that TJ will be in trouble if he makes one mistake, because the one thing Mighty Mouse does better than anyone else is take opportunities that are given to him. If it was TJ fighting Mighty Mouse instead of Cody when Cody dropped TJ, even with 5 seconds left or however long there was, I don't remember, TJ would have been out. He would have been gone. Mighty Mouse would have finished it. TJ did a lot of good stuff to survive. He got low. He put his guard up. He went back. He moved his head back and forth. Mighty Mouse would not have given him that chance. There is no more complete mixed martial artist, a guy who knows all styles and blends them together and flows them together more than Mighty Mouse. There really isn't. He's the absolute best at that. He can transition from striking to grappling in the same way that a boxer transitions from a jab to a cross. There's no differentiation. Some of them actually you could see when the fight switches from striking to clinching or from striking to groundwork. You could see a split second where it's almost like they switch gears. Like this is another kind of competition to them. It's like if you were playing golf and you suddenly have to, I don't know why I said golf so weird. It's like if you're playing golf and you had to suddenly switch to basketball. Your brain would need a moment to adjust. You'd have to put down the putter, you'd have to go get the basketball, you'd have to start dribbling. You get in a whole other mindset. And you still see that nowadays, even with how long MMA has been prevalent. It's been a little while now. It hasn't been that long, I guess. But even with how long it's been around, you still see that little switch. Like you have to switch gears. And you never see that with Mighty Mouse, ever. He goes straight from a cross to a takedown to a submission with no pause. No pause. None at all. Doesn't think about it. His body instinctively knows that this is the next transition. And I think more than anything, that would be the downfall of TJ. 100%. Because TJ, as good a wrestler he is, and as much as he's been doing wrestling just as much as striking, I might be talking a little bit too fast today. I don't know why I'm talking so fast. I guess I'm hyped for just the idea of this fight. As much as he's very, very good at those and very good at transitioning, it's not to the same level. And then transitioning even within the same discipline, transitioning even within grappling or within striking itself, Mighty Mouse is still good. I don't need to tell you guys how he won the last fight. Who would have thought that would be possible? Who would have thought that was a move that could be done anywhere but a movie? Even professional wrestling, the fake kind, it'd be hard for someone to pull off. It's probably been done, before, but it was choreographed before time. I'm sure. So if it was, I'm sure it's been done. I don't watch much professional wrestling, but to do that, and I guess he's done it in sparring. It's something he's consistently been pulling off. Um, so absolutely insane fighter. I don't know if TJ could do it. Um, I don't know. To me, it's not a question of who would win. To me, it's a question of how much of a chance does TJ have. And you guys know how much I like TJ. One of my absolute favorite fighters. Um, so yeah, I cannot wait for that fight to happen. If it happens, I really do hope it happens. All right. I think I've hyped that enough. I think I spent long enough talking about a fight that might never happen. So, what's the last thing I want to talk about? So last thing I want to talk about is I want to start doing a movie in these podcasts, and I'm glad you guys liked the Ipo one, and thank you for all the many corrections about the pronunciation. I really tried my best. I'm horrible with that kind of shit. But I did watch all 3 seasons, and I found out there's 2 movies apparently. Someone mentioned that. I'm going to watch those tonight, actually, or I'm going to watch one of them. So you guys responded really well to that, but don't worry, the channel's not going to start changing to like entertainment driven, but I will be doing a video on martial arts movies or shows every once in a while, because if anything, it breaks up the monotony. It makes me excited again if I've been doing too much of the same thing, and you guys seem to like it. So today I'm going to talk about Way of the Dragon, not Enter the Dragon, but Way of the Dragon. It's called different things in different countries, but it's a Bruce Lee movie. It's one that Bruce Lee directed, and it has some of the best fight scenes that have ever been made, choreographed, done. Just hands down, absolutely incredible fight scenes. The quality of the movie is, you're not going to get like the best story in the entire world. You're not going to get amazing acting, especially if you're watching the dub version. But the last fight scene is the iconic one where it's Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris. So before we talk about the fight with Chuck Norris, I wanted to just kind of flesh out the movie a little bit, just briefly. So basically, there's a Chinese family that owns a restaurant in Rome. And they're trying to be bought out by by this like mob boss who's trying to make him sell the restaurant so he could use it for whatever nefarious purposes he wants to. And I think he's an American. Usually, Chinese villains are British because of Chinese history and kung fu movies. But I think this guy's supposed to be an American. I know Chuck Norris is supposed to be an American at the end. The guy when he fights Lee. So that's basically it. Is this woman writes her uncle, one of the owners of the restaurant. She writes her uncle, and then I don't know if you guys can hear. I'm making tea in the background. It's really loud to me. So if you hear something that sounds angry, that's what it is. So yeah, that's the basic premise. Is that she calls her uncle, and her uncle's like, "Oh, I could send a guy," and he sends Bruce Lee. And of course, in this world, they don't know that that's the coolest thing ever. Like, could you imagine that? You got a problem, and you call your uncle for help, and they send you Bruce Lee. I'd be pretty stoked. But she doesn't know that, so she's like, why did they send this small little guy to help me with a bunch of street toughs? And so a lot of the movie is, first it's just kind of comical situations because it's, naive farm boy. He gets asked up to a woman's hotel and doesn't know like why or whatever it is, and so like she shows her boobs and he's like, oh my god, I'm a naive farm boy, and he runs out of there. There's a bunch of gags like that that kind of hit or miss. It's kind of like, oh, that's kind of funny, but move on and get to the fight scenes already. And so the boss sends like some people to intimidate them. The first time Bruce Lee isn't socially, he's socially inept. He doesn't realize they're leaving after just beating up his new friends. So yeah, he lets them go, and then they all hate him. Finally, there's a fight scene, and it's pretty good. It's just Bruce Lee versus some street toughs, but he choreographed it. He's fast. The fight scene's entertaining. It's well shot. That happens like a couple times. Just they're intimidating. Escalation. It keeps escalating until for the climax of the movie, the big boss, the mob guy, brings in Chuck Norris and a couple of his like lieutenants. One guy he trained, and then another guy's like from Japan. And it all ends with a showdown between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris in the Coliseum. It looks really cool. You could tell that they didn't have the money for a permit to shoot in the Coliseum. Either that or you're just straight up not allowed to film there. I don't know. But it's like a backdrop. But you, with the film quality and the way they use depth of field, it's hard to tell unless you're looking for it. It's not bad. So it looks like they're fighting in the Coliseum. And they got the ruins right and everything. And it's a really, really good fight scene, especially for the day and age that it was shot in. The story of the fight scene is pretty good because first Bruce Lee starts off by getting his ass thoroughly kicked by Chuck Norris. And Chuck Norris is a legit martial artist, by the way. He has a lot of black belts, including a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, if I remember correctly. He's a legit martial artist, and he was a championship kickboxer, I think only in point sparring, because I've found some old footage of him, and he's good, but it's mainly just point sparring. But that's more applicable than you would think. The problem obviously is that you don't learn how to follow up, and you don't learn how to get out of the way. Those are really important. But you learn how to strike first and how to strike hard, so the judges know that you really did get that solid hit. So it's it's more legitimate than you would think, I guess. And at the time, for the options of what was available, in any kind of kicking context, not boxing. Boxing obviously has been legitimate and badass and for a very long time. But as far as kicking went, it was one of the most legitimate competitions you could do at that time. So it's a fight scene with Bruce Lee and one of the baddest guys at the time. Chuck Norris tells this story actually where Lee calls him up and tells him about the fight scene, and Chuck Norris is like, "Oh, you want to be on film beating the champion?" And then Bruce Lee went, "No, I want to be on film killing the champion." And it's just kind of the classic Bruce Lee attitude, like, a little arrogant but so charming and nice that you can't help but like him. So the fight scene starts off with Lee getting his ass thoroughly kicked. And then what happens is that Lee decides he can't continue fighting with just speed and strength, because Chuck Norris is faster and stronger. So he starts using a bunch of techniques that are still really important to this day, that were just cutting edge to see in a martial arts film. The first thing he does is he starts bouncing up and down, staying light on his feet, and everyone's like, "Oh, okay, he's defensive and he's using rhythm and he's staying light on his feet." But it's much more than that, because what happens is one of his favorite things to talk about, one of the things he talked about in his books, is broken rhythm. So what he does is he establishes a pattern with his feet, ba-dup, 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 and then he breaks it just as Chuck Norris is about to come in. I can't remember if he breaks it himself first to kind of scare him. So he's like da-da, 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 ba-da, and then comes at him. And he's like, "Whoa, what the hell?" Chuck Norris is like, "Whoa, what the hell?" He established, I got used to kind of this pattern, and then it was broken up, and then Lee feints just as Chuck Norris is coming in. So it's like very high level sports competition martial arts, back when this was filmed, I think 60s or 70s. So it's really impressive to see that in a fight scene of that day and age, and when kung fu films were absolutely ridiculously over the top, you get something that's a little bit more legitimate for competition sparring. Not so much for like a street fighter self-defense, unless you're fighting someone who also happens to be trained and you need to use rhythm manipulation, and the fight's gone on that long instead of the normal 10 seconds. But it's still really impressive to see something like that in that regard. And then he starts using feints. Some of them are legitimate feints. Some of them are just kind of silly, like he'll kick Chuck Norris's hand to hurt it, and then Norris like withdraws his hand the next time he goes to kick, and then Lee hits him with something else. Or was that before? Was it the scene before? That might be both scenes where but Lee does that at one point. But you know what? With shoes on and as fast as he kicked, it might legitimately hurt. It's still kind of goofy, but whatever. But some of them are legitimately good feints. And they're used a lot today in the UFC. They've become feints that have become common use, and probably were at that time too, but not as much, not as in that context, not as well known. So once again, kind of fun to see it broken down. If you're really into fighting and you know the fundamentals and you know all the basics and you watch this fight scene, you're gonna be pretty impressed with it. Um, so rhythm manipulation, uh, feinting, good footwork, good defensive movement. There's a slow motion where I don't know if it was planned or not. My instincts say it wasn't actually planned. I think Bruce Lee just told Chuck Norris, "Come at me with everything you have, or maybe come at me with these specific kicks, and I'm just going to evade you, and we'll do it like 10 times till we get one that looks really cool." Uh, and it looks just very. The whole fight looks very alive for something that's choreographed. It looks very alive. It looks very it looks very flowing with their movement, and it comes together very well. And also, it's great acting from both of them. Chuck Norris is playing someone who will not give in. He'd rather die. And Bruce Lee's this farm boy who obviously you could kind of see he doesn't like hurting people. He's never killed anyone before. And Norris just kind of forces him to, which is like, I'm not going to tell you if he does or not, or what ends up happening if you haven't seen the movie. So spoiler from 30 years ago, I guess. But Norris just won't give up, and Lee has to make a choice about what happens. So there's some good emotional content, I guess. There's some good emotional content, which we need. We need emotional content. And I'll go into Enter the Dragon too at some point. But so overall, good movie. I do have to warn you that it is one of the worst. If you watch it dubbed, it's one of the worst dubs I've ever seen in my life. It's like, The Room with with Tommy Wiseau. The movie that had such bad acting, they made a whole other movie about the making of it. The dubbing is on that level. Also, there's like, I don't think it was such bad stereotypes in the actual movie itself, but the guy dubbing this black gangster is supposed to. I think he's using trying to use like a stereotypical black guy voice from the time, so it's he kind of does a racist thing, but you end up feeling less bad about it because of less bad for people being made fun of. You end up feeling less bad about the racism than how bad an actor this guy is. There's this line about Chinese spare ribs. It's done so insanely badly. You're just like wow, man. Wow. Like, you just have to hear it. You have to hear some of this bad dubbing. So if if the stereotype or whatever, if the stereotypical readings of that time is something that offends you, then I'd definitely go with the sub thing. I think it's just the Americans doing the dub over it that did it, because nothing comes across as inherently racist or wrong or anything. There's a joke about one of the bad guys is supposed to be gay, and then Lee doesn't realize that, and he like touches Lee's stomach. It's more fitting into him being like a naive farm boy. I guess he's kind of stereotypically. I guess he's kind of a bad stereotype. But as far as just over the top terrible, the American dub is definitely offensive. But on the other hand, it's hilarious how bad a job that they do with it. So you make your own choice on that. I'd personally recommend watching it just because the bad acting is so funny that you almost can't take it seriously. But up to you. Besides that, decent movie. Watch it for the fight scenes. Definitely watch it for the fight scenes. They're well done. If you're not gonna watch it, just watch the fight scene with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris because it's really good. That's it for that. I might do a whole video on that one day, but in the far future, it'd be kind of fun to do that. Getting back into the fight breakdowns now, and that's going to be the next several videos. Definitely gonna cover Lomachenko versus Rigondeaux. And by the way, I've heard Rigondeaux's name pronounced 3 or 4 different ways from people who should all know 100% correctly how to say it, which is making me question it. I've heard Rigondo, Rigondeaux, Rigondeaux, and Rigondeaux. And Rigondeaux seems to be the most common one. But if you guys know, tell me in the comments. I'll probably just pick one and then just, know I'm gonna get corrected at some point. But I want to say the guy's name correctly. It's disrespectful not to. So that's coming up very soon. And besides that, nothing really left to talk about. So have an awesome day and happy training.